All right. Good afternoon, Ryan. This is on our audience, GovCon Giants. Thank you so much for joining us on our GovCon Giants podcast. So to introduce our guest today, we've got Ryan Bradel with us. That is with Ward and Berry, and they are a law firm out of the that does federal government contracting. And so I'm going to read a little bit about his bio and introduce him. I'm excited that he is here with us today. So that way we can learn a little bit about what they do and how they support government contractors as a whole. And hopefully the goal is at the end of this time together, you would have learned, our audience would learn a little bit more about what they probably should be doing, considering, and information they probably should go seek out. So thanks again, Ryan, for being on with us. So Ryan is a partner at
glad to be here.
Thanks. So Ryan is a partner at Ward and Berry, PLLC, and they represent government contractors in all aspects of federal, state, and local procurement matters, including bid protests, contract disputes, federal acquisition regulation counseling, SBA programs, and all other interfaces between the contractor and the government. He works across all multiple industries such as defense, intelligence, IT, cybersecurity, construction, etc. And that's only naming a few of the ones that's listed. Ryan focuses his practice on government contract litigation matters. He has successfully represented both protesters and interveners or awardees in bid protests before the Court of Federal Claims, the Government Accountability Office, and the agency levels, including DOD, Department of State, and Department of Veteran Affairs. So Ryan has also cultivated a unique expertise in the SBA government contracting programs and has guided companies to certifications and effective participation in all of the SBA programs. So thank you again. And I'm excited to actually ask this. I was going through and looking a little bit of, some of your background and your case law, some of the past things that you've done. And one stuck out to me. So I wanted to start there and just kind of, flow from there. So it had one that you represented a local Afghan trucking company.
Sure.
So do you do OCONUS as well, or is it, so tell me a little bit about that case.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, thanks for it's a good question. Yeah, that case was interesting. I've actually represented a number of Afghan companies.
Yes.
And so we definitely do a lot of OCONUS. Certainly in the time that I've been practicing law, since about 2006. That was a time in our nation's history when there was a lot going on in certain parts of the world, and a lot of contractors were supporting the U.S. military and the war fighter in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so, if you're a government contracts lawyer, you are going to be dealing with those sorts of issues because that's the contractors are working in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places, and so that's kind of where the work is. I also have kind of tried to direct my efforts towards some of those types of contractors. I've been involved with a great organization called the International Stability Operations Association, and it's a group for contractors that work overseas for the Department of Defense, Department of State, USAID, contractors or government agencies like that. So I've done quite a bit of work in that area. That particular contract, the one you asked about, the local Afghan trucking contract, was, it was a kind of a basic situation, standard situation where, there's some part of a contract is ambiguous. There's some term, there's some word, some language in the contract that's ambiguous. And, in this case, my client was an Afghan trucking company, and there was a dispute about whether they would get paid for the return trip, right? So if they were, transporting goods for the U.S. military, from one base to another in Afghanistan, and they were under the impression they were supposed to be paid for the return trip to bring the truck back, the empty truck back, and so that they thought they were supposed to get mileage, and the
Uh-huh.
government agreed. And so, we kind of had a little fight about that, and eventually we worked it out.
Well, it wasn't a small fight.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
saying, it
yeah,
wasn't a hundred
tens of
thousand dollar
millions.
trip.
Yeah, 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 tens of millions of dollars at stake. I mean,
Mhm.
the contractors weren't getting paid that much per mile, but when you think of how many goods needed to move
Yes.
around Afghanistan to support the various projects and activities the military was undertaking at the time, it all adds up pretty quickly. And so if the contractor thinks it's supposed to be getting paid to go there and back, and it's only getting
Mhm.
paid to go there, that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
Double the cost. So
Mhm. So,
um,
well, that's awesome to know that, you can take on the government in that sense and win.
yeah,
Feel like you have a solid case and don't be afraid. If you
yeah.
have the resources to go after it, go do it. Right.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think a lot of people think that if they're going up against the government, that
Hmm.
they have no chance, because, like, who sits in judgment of the government? And it's like, well, I'll tell you, there are boards of contract appeals, and there's the Court of Federal Claims. Those are
Hmm.
two different forums where you can bring a case against the government. And I've found the judges there to be very fair, very impartial. And if you have a strong case, you can win. It all comes down to the law and the facts. I think there's sometimes contractors, they think that they have a case, but the more you talk about it, you realize, well,
Mm.
now actually this was your fault. This one's on you. I'm sorry. Hate to tell you, but I
Mm.
don't think this case is going to go very far. And that's something that I sort of pride myself on, is that, I'm not going to tell you you have a good case when you don't,
Oh, yeah. Right. Okay.
because I don't, I get paid by the hour. So, it's in my interest to handle your case, but I don't want you to, I want to build a long-term relationship with a client. Uh,
Absolutely.
I'm not going to do, get the short term win and a long term loss. And so I'd
Hmm.
rather develop a long term relationship with you, rather than handle a case where, at the end, you don't win and you pay me a lot of money and then everybody's just upset. So I'll be honest with you and tell you whether you have a good case or not.
Well, that's great. And we appreciate that. I am positive the contractors really appreciate that. And I want to back up a little bit about on your history. So
Sure.
why even GovCon? How did you even start down that path? Because that's a very, very specific, you know, niche. Like why
Yeah.
GovCon?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think, I don't know that the story is all that fun or interesting.
Okay.
But I think it has a good ending, in the sense that, I kind of fell into it,
Okay.
like a lot of people. I mean, I knew I
Mhm.
wanted to be a lawyer since I was 7 years old, and I knew I
Oh.
was going to law school, and I knew I wanted to be a litigator and be in the courtroom, and all the courtroom drama. Um,
Mhm.
but I didn't know, I didn't really know what GovCon was, and so, I don't think, even as I was in law school,
Mhm.
I didn't think I realized that there were a lot of companies out there selling their goods and services to the government. I kind of figured government employees uh,
Mhm.
built tanks and planes.
Yes.
There are these private companies that did it. Wow, that's crazy.
Yes.
And so, it was one of those things where I like the fight, right? I like I like
I
the
read that.
yeah, I like to pursue justice and be on the side of the
Mm.
person who's getting a raw deal. And so,
Mm.
I also knew I wanted to be in Washington, D.C. I did not grow up here, but I had spent some time here before law school, and I knew I wanted to come back. And so I just had a mentor kind of point me in that direction and say, hey, look, Washington, D.C. is an industry town, it's a company town. There's a lot of good opportunities in GovCon. And so, just kind of started exploring that option.
Mm.
And so it was really just a kind of more of a, opportunistic career choice.
Okay.
but I found that I've loved it. For a lot of reasons. I mean, number one is, you get the opportunity to support the war fighter, support veterans. A lot of my clients are
Mhm.
veterans and they've gotten out and started companies.
Okay.
I mentioned I have, or you mentioned reading from my bio that I have the expertise in the Small Business Administration program.
Mhm.
So sometimes I'm working with startups or companies where the founders of the companies are still involved, and it's very entrepreneurial, and you
Okay.
feel good about helping a small business grow.
Mhm.
Those are some of the things I really like about it. I don't know if it's because I've been doing it for so long, and sort of familiarity kind of leads to love, but I find the FAR kind of interesting. There's all these rules and exceptions
Yes.
to the exceptions, and a lot of
Uh-huh.
exceptions, and I think being able to develop an expertise in something's a lot of fun.
So I guess it's like the puzzle pieces, right? You get to figure out the puzzle pieces along the
Right.
way. Because really that's what the
Great way to
FAR
put it.
is. It's a big puzzle piece with those
Yep.
little pieces. So,
Yep. Yep. No, that's exactly right. It really is like a puzzle sometimes, and
mhm.
you got to know your way around. You got to know what you're looking for to find those pieces and put them all together.
So follow-up question then, since you like the fight,
Yep.
and for those that are in the audience listening, it's like, okay, how many of these types of cases even go to trial? Like you're actually in the courtroom having to slug it out versus we can just settle something.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's a great question. And the answer depends on what type of case it is. So
okay.
there's really two big buckets that we're dealing with, the kind of litigation I'm dealing with. You're either dealing with a bid protest
Hmm.
or a claim, right? And so a bid protest is, forgive me if people already know this, but for those who don't know, a
No.
bid protest is where you bid on a contract, or bid on a solicitation, an RFP.
Hmm.
You put a proposal in, and if the government doesn't select your proposal,
Right.
you have the opportunity to file a bid protest, which is essentially like a lawsuit saying that the government didn't follow the rules in selecting, when it failed to select your proposal. So that's bid protest. Claims is when you're already performing the work for the government. You're performing the contract, and something happens. There's a change in circumstances
Hmm.
where you think you might be
Hmm.
entitled to more money, or there's, as I was talking about at the beginning with the Afghan trucking contract, where there's a term in the contract that's in dispute. And so that's a claim where you're asking the government for more money for the performance that you're doing. So um, the bid protest cases, those are fast. They happen quickly,
Okay.
and you're much more likely to get to the merits, as it were, where it's either at the GAO or the Court of Federal Claims, the judge or the GAO attorney, they actually make a decision. That happens frequently, and it's not like typical litigation that people are used to that drags on for months or years with all sorts of ancillary fights as part of the litigation. Bid protests happen quickly. It's
Okay.
usually a couple of months. You file your protest, the government gives you the record, and you draft briefs and make your arguments, decisions made. It happens quick. A lot of times the government will take corrective action. They'll just decide, they'll say, listen, you're right, we made a mistake, we're going to fix it. So not a lot of, when there is a quote unquote settlement, and that's what I would call corrective action, is in a
Hmm.
way sort of
Okay.
settlement. Not a lot of discussion about it, not a lot of negotiation. The government just decides they're going to take corrective action, or the GAO attorney, or the Court of Federal Claims judge just issues a decision. So that's bid protest. Claims are much more likely to, and so to answer your initial question, you're in court a lot with bid protests. I was in court twice
Okay.
last week
Okay.
on two different protests. The judge wants to get to a resolution quickly, so the judge will bring in and say, make your arguments. Here's what I saw. I looked at the record. I looked at your briefs, and the judge will have a bunch of questions and render a decision. With claims, that's more like the traditional civil litigation that people hear about, where it goes on for a long time.
Okay.
There's a very complicated discovery process, depositions, documents being requested, and those are much more likely to settle outside of court.
Okay. So, for example, you mentioned GAO quite a bit. Can you talk a little bit about that, the accountability office, and how maybe, so one, can a small business, for example, even file something on their own, or do they always need an attorney?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the GAO is one of the forums where you can take a bid protest. And the Competition and Contracting Act gives GAO jurisdiction for over bid protests. The Court of Federal Claims also has almost identical jurisdiction as the GAO. And so it's really, and that's under the Tucker Act. So it's really up to the protester to decide where they want to be, whether they want to be in the GAO or the Court of Federal Claims. And
Okay.
there's advantages and disadvantages to each. The Specifically about the GAO gets the vast majority of protests. They get way more protests than the Court of Federal Claims. Uh,
Mhm.
and there's a few reasons why, and that's changing a little bit. I think the court is getting more and more protests, and I think protesters are a little bit frustrated with the GAO because they feel like the GAO is maybe a little bit too government friendly.
Okay.
That's what I'm hearing. Not casting aspersions on any of my friends at the GAO. They're very brilliant lawyers, and they do a great job. But I think that's kind of the feeling lately. But the
Mm.
point is,
Okay.
GAO gets a lot more protests because it's faster, it's cheaper, it's less complicated than the Court of Federal Claims, typically. Um, and so to answer your question about whether a small business can bring a protest to the GAO, the answer is yes, you can. You do not need to be an attorney.
Okay.
You can bring your own protest. The one way in which that might get a little bit complicated is when it comes to protective orders. As you might imagine, bid protests, they deal with a lot of proprietary information, right? It's proposals, it's pricing, it's a company's technical approach to providing a good or a service to the government, and they don't want their competitors seeing that. It's highly proprietary, highly secret. And so the way that the GAO handles that is they have protective orders, which means that the information exchanged, during the bid protest process can't be publicly disclosed. And those who are involved in decision making in sort of contract and proposal decision making aren't allowed to see the information of their competitors, but the
Mhm.
lawyers are, right? So
Okay.
I represent a lot of different clients. I don't get involved in their competitive decision making process.
Okay.
I don't know about how all their pricing works, and so it's not a problem if I see a competitor's pricing and use it in my arguments at the GAO. I just
Okay.
can't then pass that information on to my client, right? Is to
Oh,
protect.
good,
There's
good
a wall.
information. Okay.
Yeah. And so it gets tough when if you're a protester and you don't have a lawyer, you might be prevented from seeing proprietary and for your competitors' proprietary information. And it might make it more difficult for you to make your protest arguments. So I think it helps to have a lawyer, and there's an advantage to having a lawyer when you're pursuing a bid protest, but it's not absolutely necessary. You know, uh, Business owners, small business owners, they win protests all the time without lawyers.
Okay.
It's usually when they have a very, clear and obvious mistake that they have identified. You can do it without a lawyer. I think you should use a lawyer, but you can
Mhm.
do it.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that light on that. That protective clause portion is really important for us to know that you can't, they won't be able to see it if they were to go up and represent themselves. So that definitely is like
That's
playing with
right.
it's like playing with your, trying to play tennis with your hands tied behind your back, if that's the case, right?
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, in a way, it kind of. I mean, it depends. I mean, usually the people who are protesting without a lawyer, they're protesting something that the government did to them. They're protesting something about the evaluation that the government made, that the government made
Mhm.
some mistake, right? And so if that's your main protest ground, then it can work. Where it gets challenging is when you're protesting the way that the government evaluated your competitor. and you think that the government's evaluation of your competitor was mistaken or unfair. And in that case, that's where it helps to have a lawyer who can see your competitor's proprietary information and leverage that information to make good arguments.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, bringing the clarity between maybe when you can do it yourself versus when you probably should not be doing it yourself. So
Right.
in light of that, like, what are some of the things that you're seeing, cases that you're seeing? Is it executive orders, new policies? I know new laws, for example, what happened with the SBA and the social, the disadvantaged narratives, and like
Yeah. Yeah.
pivot on a dime, you need to fix this, get it done. Like, what are some of the things that you're seeing that's coming to you from your clients beyond maybe bid protest?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say some of the biggest things that I've handled in the last year, I would say are number one, REAs and claims related to inflation. And I'm going to name three, and then I'm going to come back and talk about each one.
Okay.
I would say that. I would say, cybersecurity,
Mm.
CMMC is huge. A lot of questions there. And then number three, you mentioned the 8A, social and economic disadvantage. 8A is a program for socially and economically disadvantaged persons, and there was a big court case that had kind of changed the program. So I'll talk about each one of those, but yeah, with inflation, and we're a little bit past it now. I mean, it was and from an economic perspective, inflation was really out of control in 2021 and 2022. Although we're starting to deal with the fallout, now. And obviously what was happening is you had a lot of contractors who had signed up to perform fixed price contracts. And
Mhm.
in a fixed price contract, of course, the risk is on the contractor. It's high risk, high reward for the contractor, right?
Mhm.
You tell the government it's going to cost, $1 million. And, if you are really efficient and you can find some cost efficiencies, you can make a good profit. The problem is, the risk is that if the opposite happens and the cost of materials, the cost of labor, the cost of doing the work goes way up, it's really difficult to get an adjustment from the government when you agreed to a fixed price contract. And so we saw a lot of that where contractors, and it was contractors in a variety of sectors,
Mhm.
where contractors had, signed up to a contract, agreed to do work for the government at a fixed price, and then inflation happened and all of their costs went way up. Labor costs went up, material costs went up for a lot of
Mhm.
builders, fuel costs went up for everybody. And so all of their costs went up and they were having a hard time making a profit at all, or really they were losing money on these contracts, the contractors. And so, they wanted to go back to the government and get an adjustment to the price. And one thing to be aware of is that there is no legal entitlement to an adjustment because of inflation, right? It's
Mhm.
contractors need to be very aware of that. A lot of times you hear contractors say, "Oh, well, I'm going to go in low with my price to, beat everybody, and I'll get an adjustment later." And that's one way to approach things, but it's very risky because you're entitled to an adjustment if there is a change to the contract, if the government, asks for a change, if site conditions are different than you anticipated, right? The
Right.
government's
Mhm.
specifications weren't accurate. These are, well-established reasons why you can get an adjustment, but there is no entitlement to adjustment because of inflation. Now, that said, the government also recognized the problem, and they didn't want to have all these contractors going out of business, and so they did a few things here and there. One was called a FAR Part 50, which has been around for a long time. It's not something new, but it's something the government started using a lot more. Was under a FAR Part 50, sort of extraordinary contractual action adjustment. So that's when there's no legal entitlement to the adjustment, but the government recognizes that as a matter of um, a matter of justice and fairness, or just because the government really need your services and doesn't want you going out of business, they can kind of exercise their discretion to pay you money.
Right, right.
So there's that. There are some other adjustments that were available related to COVID and so forth. But I think the big takeaway now, and sorry, this is a long way of getting there, but I think the big takeaway now for contractors is going forward, you really need to take advantage of economic price adjustment clauses, EPAs. The FAR has some language for economic price adjustment clauses, but it's really pretty flexible. And I think if you're going to agree to a fixed price contract in an economically volatile environment, you need to have an economic price adjustment clause that sort of lays out how you and the government will calculate whether a price adjustment is needed and how that calculation will happen. Now it cuts both ways, right? Because the government, they're going to want it to be fair. And so if they're going to say, hey, look, we'll put an economic price adjustment clause in, but if your costs go down, then you owe us, you owe us the difference. If costs go up, we'll pay you. If costs go down, you owe us the difference. So there's always trade-offs.
Right.
Nothing's easy. So, but that's a big thing we've been dealing with. I mentioned the 8A program. Big program, common program, great program. A lot of people take advantage of 8A program, and it's a very good program for socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. And what happened earlier this year, a few months ago, is a federal court decided a case. And what had happened is that somebody, a company that had been rejected from the 8A program, filed a lawsuit saying the 8A program is unconstitutional insofar as it gives certain ethnicities preferences over others, right? And we all know the Constitution says equal protection, right? Equal protection of the laws. And we don't need to get into the complex history of the various Supreme Court cases that have come down recently, kind of interpreting and giving flesh to, okay, what does equal protection mean? It's a complicated analysis, but in this particular case, this federal court in Nashville, Tennessee, said the 8A agreed. They said the 8A program is unconstitutional because it gives certain ethnicities priority. All right, and that's been appealed, and it'll probably very well may go to the Supreme Court. So stay tuned for how that's going to shake out. But in the meantime, the SBA, in response, they said, all right, well, if we can't give an automatic preference based on somebody's race or ethnicity, we believe we can still give a preference if the person can specifically show that they experienced discrimination, right? So, you can't just say, oh, I'm, Hispanic or Native American or Black, and so I automatically get things. But if you can say, oh, 10 years ago, I applied for a loan with this bank, and they rejected me because of my race or ethnicity, then that would be an example of specific discrimination, and that would be a reason why you could be able to take advantage of the 8A program. So I'm kind of oversimplifying there, but that's that's kind of where we're at. And so what you had is you had a lot of companies who were in the 8A program that then had to go back and file, submit a narrative to the SBA that described, specifically how they'd been discriminated against in their life. And so that's how things are going to look going forward. And so, a bit of a cottage industry is growing up of, small companies, not law firms, but, consulting companies that are helping to write these narratives. But it's very much in flux. We'll see how the law shakes out.
So I have a question about that. So what is the SBA then doing with the narratives? Are they following up to see how true they are? What's the behind the scenes? Because we have a client that had to do theirs, and they got their approval, the narrative. But what's being done with the narratives? Like, what is the SBA actually doing? Because the concern for I've heard multiple times is there going to be backlash? Now we have to put all this in writing. Like, where does that
Right,
go? What's going to happen
right,
to that stuff?
right, right. Well, yeah, it's a good question. I think that what I have seen, and yeah, I don't know that there's statistics on this or
Uh-huh.
any space anything official, but what I've seen is the SBA is being I'm trying to think how to put this without making it sound negative, but they're essentially rubber stamping these disadvantaged narratives, right? They're saying, okay, they're certainly not investigating. It's not like they're
Okay.
sending investigators out there saying, oh, did this person really experience discrimination? Right? They're assuming that everything you say in your narrative is true, and they're not really testing that. And I think that they're taking a pretty generous approach when it comes to discrimination as well. There's basically everything can be discrimination, and so
Right.
I have yet to hear of anybody who was already in the 8A program who has now been kicked out of the program because their narrative wasn't sad enough, wasn't discriminatory enough.
Predatory enough.
Right?
Right. Mhm.
Yeah, I think the 8A, I mean the SBA is being pretty um
Lenient
they're
there.
allowed, they're being lenient. Yeah. And, I hesitate to use the word lenient because that almost makes light of the discrimination, right? I mean, discrimination that
Mhm.
people have experienced is very serious and it needs to be addressed. And so, I don't want to say that SBA is being lenient, but, they are accepting the narratives as
Narratives. Right. Mhm.
people stay in the program.
Yeah, absolutely. Understood that. Okay. Well, that's good to know. That is not going anywhere. There's no next step behind the scenes where
Right.
the companies can, really do have a valid concern.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that, it's another administrative loophole you got to jump through, but
Mhm.
seems for now the 8A program's not going anywhere.
Well, that's great because a lot of people were afraid, for that.
Right.
Okay. So you mentioned also the cybersecurity because I do know that is a major undertaking right now. So
Yeah.
share a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course. And I kind of try to stay away from the more technical aspects of
Understood.
what it means to technically comply with
Hmm.
CMMC. But it's something that I think has become a huge burden for small businesses. It's
Hmm.
one thing for a huge company. They've been doing cybersecurity for a long time, and they've built it into their costs. But you have these small businesses that all of a sudden have this major new cost that they have to pay for,
Yep.
and trying to figure out how to work that into their pricing. Because when now all of a sudden, their prices have to go up, and the government's saying, "Wait, your price, you charged us." 20% less last year. What's going on? And the small business is like, well, I got to be CMMC compliant, and that's not cheap.
Exactly.
And so that to me is, I think, where the biggest area that I've been dealing with, and where I think that there's room for small businesses to advocate for themselves, and make it known to their government customer, but also to to Congress, to the regulators, that they need some relief here, where the cost of becoming CMMC compliant and other cybersecurity compliance measures can be somehow either taken out of the evaluation, so the company's not penalized for having to add that to their costs in the coming year, or somehow they get some relief from that additional cost, because it is a lot. And
Yes.
the other thing, yeah, is that it is an area that's in flux. I mean, I think that the DoD often takes the lead on a lot of these standards, and so they've kind of taken the lead here, but they're still trying to figure out exactly how what is reasonable to expect a small business to do when it comes to cybersecurity, and
Mhm.
also some variation, or some a sort of a sliding scale. I mean, they do have a sliding scale, right? There's different standards
Levels. Yeah.
on.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that we have to recognize that, a company that's doing, road construction for the Army Corps of Engineers, for example, does not need to meet the same cybersecurity standards as a company that's doing that has sort of access to government databases, right?
Mhm.
And so, I think that there is some of that, right? They do, there is some gradation there, but I think that it needs to be a little bit more of a flexible standard.
Okay, got it. So the ones that, okay, so for example, so looking at CMMC or even outside of the three that you've talked about, are there other big issues that has been going on that you see like your clients are just like, okay, this is really like I can't sleep at night, is really causing heart palpitations, right? There were a lot of executive orders that was passed and things of that nature. How do companies, whether they're small, medium, or large, right? Um,
Right.
Executive orders, for example, are passed that could affect a government contractor. How
Yeah.
should they look at those?
Yeah. I mean, if the question is how do they stay on top of it, that's that's a really good question because there's no easy answer, right? There's um, number one, these things move quickly, right?
Mhm.
There's the oftentimes, a president will issue an executive order and it comes out and that's it. You got to start complying right away. But they're also not things that are going to be on the front page of the Washington Post either.
Right.
And so, there's no single repository where you can keep track of these things. So, I would recommend that, number one is to get involved with organizations that help small businesses. One that I love, that I'm very involved with is called CCAF. It's Small and Emerging Contractors Advisory Forum. That's a great organization that its main purpose is just simply to educate small contractors on things that are coming down the pike, and whether that's law or policy or economic issues. It's really there to help the small contractor. PTAX, the Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, they're constantly putting on programming. So it is something where contractors need to be proactive and take it upon themselves to stay in the loop. I also recommend having a good legal advisor. And I know that sounds a little bit self-serving, but it is important to have a relationship with a lady. Part of my job is to stay on top of these things. I keep track of the various executive orders and laws that are coming out. I write a lot of blog posts on them, so I try and stay on top of that. In addition to my day job, which is representing clients, and so I think it's important to have somebody that you trust, who is on top of it. You can call up and say, "Hey, what's going on with this or that?" And like I said, I'm not going to charge you for a brief call, brief question, and I'm if it's something you don't need to be concerned about, I'll let you know, right?
That's
Like I said at
awesome.
the beginning, yeah, there's no point in me charging you a bunch of money, for something you don't need to be worried about. But if there is something you need to be worried about, I'll let you know, and we'll deal with it together. So, I think the most important thing is that a small contractor, your job is to run your business and to and to serve your customer and to do business development and to sell.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to make it easy on yourself by taking advantage of the resources that are out there to keep you educated on the legal developments that are happening.
Okay, so appreciate that. Awesome. So I'm thankful for the organization that you shared because
Yeah.
I think that's somewhere they can go. You said it was called CCAF, right?
CCAF, yeah, SECAF, the Small and Emerging Contractors Advisory Forum.
Okay, alrighty, good. So people can go out and search that particular forum and see if it's a fit for them.
That's
Um,
right.
so what would you say, and we can start winding down here, but what would you say, like the medium to large contractors, they know that small businesses don't know why they're successful, or things they should be even considering, right? So what are some of those things?
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is, and small contractors, medium contractors, they all have the access to the same lawyers, right? What we do is highly specialized, and you want a good lawyer,
Mhm.
we all kind of, the good ones all know the same stuff. What I think the difference between a large contractor and a small contractor, what they have, the large contractors have highly developed um, business development and proposal teams, and they make very intelligent decisions about when it's worthwhile to pursue something and when it's not. And I think that, to me, the one thing I see is I see a lot of my smaller clients spending a lot of time and money and effort going after a proposal that's probably not worth it.
Mm.
That they're not well positioned to perform.
Mhm.
And so, I think that I think the big difference is having, efficiency there, where, you don't waste your time on things that are not going to be worthwhile for you, and you really focus on performing those contracts that you're going to be good at and that you're going to do well. Because I think, the biggest thing is establishing a reputation as a high quality contractor, as opposed to a contractor who just kind of does everything and doesn't do
Mhm.
it all that well.
Yep.
That, to me, that's where I see the most successful companies.
Mm. Okay. And now I'm assuming then maybe some of the do medium sized companies tend to have attorneys on retainer?
Yeah. So, I mean, people use the term retainer. I mean, the way I work is that I don't charge any sort of monthly fee. You don't have to
Okay.
pay me anything to keep me around, right? Just you pay me by the hour, right? And so I have relationships with a lot of my clients where they call me up anytime, and I
Okay.
take a call, and you pay me by the hour. I think one thing is that a company, when it matures,
Mhm.
you get an in-house lawyer, right? You get a
Right.
lawyer who's a full-time employee of the firm, and their job, when you're big enough, their job is to manage the outside lawyers, be a
Mhm.
liaison with them, keep the outside lawyers informed of what's happening with the company, and also being a repository or a gatekeeper for information. We've been talking about some of these developments in the law. I think it's important. We've been talking about that. It's good if a company has one person who's taking in all of these inputs
Mhm.
and about what's happening in the law, but also knows the company well enough to help the company adjust and
That's
make
good.
adjustments to
Okay.
the law. So yeah, I mean, I think I think it is important to have a good in-house lawyer when you get there, and when you can afford it. And I've seen that it's really helped companies take off, when you can, so a medium-sized company, when they get to the point where they're like, yeah, okay, we need an in-house lawyer, I think that's usually a really good thing. But if you're a smaller company and you're not
Right.
there,
Mhm.
um, and when it comes to being able to afford an in-house lawyer, then you can still have a virtual in-house lawyer with somebody like me,
Right.
somebody that
Okay.
you
Good.
know really well, that they you kind of almost bring them into your team in some ways, where you get them in the loop on what your company's doing, so your lawyer can kind of watch your back for you. And it's one thing when I get one-off calls, with a sort of a question in a vacuum. That's fine, I'll answer those. But it's a lot better when I know your business and I know what to look out for you.
Okay, so that's great. So because that's a misnomer, right, for small
Right.
businesses to even consider, like I can afford a lawyer just to be,
Yeah.
like I asked, a retainer, right? I can't afford that.
Right.
So how do
Right.
small businesses, for example, that can't do what the medium or large is doing, how can then they develop relationships with people like you all?
Yeah.
When you're feeling like, okay, it's a balance, right? You're not always bothering me or whatever.
Right.
You
Right.
like you said, I want to be able to utilize your service when I need it, and you
Yeah.
know that company as well.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple things. I mean, one, it's never a bother to me, right? I mean, I like when people call me because that's how I make money. So you're never going to be bothering me.
Okay.
But I would say that, I'd say a couple of things. Number one is that, lawyers get more expensive the more experience they get, and in some
Mhm.
ways you kind of get what you pay for.
Right.
And so, maybe, I've been doing this a long time and maybe people not may not be able to afford my rate, but I have other lawyers in my firm who are, more junior and they, they would love to come alongside a small company and kind of
Awesome.
help them along. And, they've, not to say that not to toot my own horn and say that I'm a genius or anything, but I've trained these folks
Hmm.
and they know what they're doing and I can kind of oversee things. And
Yeah.
so, I wouldn't be too scared off because there are some more affordable options out there,
Okay.
even within a firm like mine. I mean, we're not a big firm, but we have a dozen or so lawyers, and some
Mhm.
of them are much more cost effective. So that's what I would say is that
Okay.
when you talk to a lawyer, say to the lawyer, say, hey, do you have an associate that's a little bit less expensive who I can work with? I'd love to establish a relationship
Okay.
with a younger lawyer who can kind of grow as the company grows.
I love that piece of advice. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's wonderful because
sure.
again, in talking with inside of our network, lawyers, oh my gosh, that is so far-fetched for them to even consider
Right,
bringing on a lawyer on your team,
right,
right? So
right,
that provides a great solution to
right.
having relationship and growing with them. So thank you
Yeah,
for sharing that insight.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah, of course.
So is there anything that you can think of that, okay, I didn't ask that we should share with the audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess the one thing I'll say,
Mhm.
well, I'll say, let me say two things. Let me
Okay,
say
sure.
very, very quick. Number one, we were talking about bid protest before,
Uh-huh.
but one thing I didn't get to mention is, for those who don't know, bid protests happen very quickly. There's very short deadlines, and if you don't file your protest within a very narrow window, sometimes it's as short as 5 days,
Mm.
then you're going to lose the opportunity to protest. And I can't tell you how many times I've had clients call me up, oh, I want to protest this, and I said, okay, well, when did you get your notice of award or notice of unsuccessful offer?
Mhm.
Like, oh, a week ago. I'm like, what? You're kidding. Worst case,
Okay.
a lot of cases it's too late, or
Mm.
sometimes it's not too late, but the protest is due tomorrow, and now you've just ruined my evening. Now I got to stay up all night and write your protest for you, which I'll do because I like to help people. But please take it easy on your lawyer, and give them as much notice as possible that you want to protest, and don't miss out on the opportunity. The other thing that I'll say is that, and it gets back to the question of, you know, finding good legal advice and when to
Mhm.
call a lawyer is, I had a client one time that they had they were a service able veteran owned small business. And, as everybody knows, for SDVOSBs, the veteran has to control the company, right?
Right.
And this client, they had a small little line in their operating agreement that sort of called into question whether the veteran actually controlled the company, right? The veteran was the CEO, but he wanted to give his non-veteran business partner kind of a cool title, and so he made him president. So you had a CEO and you had a president,
Okay.
two positions. There was some line that kind of discussed that didn't make it clear that the president was subordinate to the CEO. And so, so that being the case, the
Mm.
SBA, said, oh, well, wait, you're not there was a protest and the SBA said, oh, you're actually not a qualified SDUSB. You lose this contract. And I was able to appeal that and made what I thought was a very creative legal argument that sort of saved the day, but it ended up costing the client a lot of money.
Oh gosh.
Almost $100,000 in legal fees to solve this problem. When what they should have done is had me review their operating agreement, which would have taken me an hour and
Yeah.
probably cost them $500, and I would have seen the problem. We could have fixed it, and it would have cost them under $1,000. Instead, it cost them, $100,000 to solve the problem. And so I think, the takeaway there is that, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I
Yes.
know lawyers are expensive. Good legal advice is expensive, although not as expensive as bad legal advice. But I think it is important to have, a trusted advisor that that can look out for these things for you.
That is priceless.
Yeah.
Because you, again, thinking of, I can't afford the attorney, but the truth is
Yeah.
you can't, like, it's like use the double negative. You can't afford, like, you have to
That's
figure it
right.
out, right? You
That's
cannot
right. That's right.
not afford to do this, right? So doing what you have to do up front. So thank you for sharing that. That's really, really important. So, well, I appreciate you taking time, your hour to spend with us, and
Yeah, happy to.
we have learned a lot of information. So I know that our contractors should now make sure that there is the EPA, the economically priced adjustment in their contract, and prayerfully there will not be a decrease in cost to them. Right? So, and also they should consider reaching out, building relationships with attorneys, even if it's, like I said, you said, a junior or associate that can help, that can grow with them. So thank you very much. And we really do appreciate your time, your knowledge, your expertise. And so we'll definitely give you send you some information when our podcast is out. So thank you for spending time.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you, Randy. I was happy to do it. I always enjoy talking about the trade.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.